Thank you all for joining us this evening for our really going to be insightful discussion on the future of Philly tech and startups. So much to get through, so much to hear from our panelists and our experts, and we're not going to delay that any further. Just to give each of you a little introduction to who we are and who's going to be talking. This is our seventh Future of Cities event that we host as part of Linerun, and I am the program manager of Linerun. I'm Brian Anselin, Drexel grad, very proud Drexel grad, and also local up until a few months ago to Philadelphia because of the pandemic, but that's all good. But aside from me, we are excited to have four incredible community leaders from the Philadelphia tech community joining us this evening to share their insight and perspective on the future of Philly tech and startups. They include Emin Gallagher, Director of Strategic Innovation and Startup Acceleration at IC at 3401 Science Center. We have Carter McClure, Managing Director of the Penn Innovation Center, powered by 1776. We have Ellen Weber, Executive Director, Robin Hood Ventures and Mid-Atlantic Diamond Ventures, and Tracy Wilson-Rossman, Chief Marketing Officer, Chariot Solutions, and founder of techgirls.org. So for those of you who have been actively following the community, these are all names that you should probably have heard of or seen in the community. Before we head to the questions, a little bit about us. Linerun is an experiential career and industry education platform for tomorrow's workforce. We empower our community of leaders to connect, innovate, and grow through media, events, and programs such as today's session. We invite you to check out our website, www.linerun.co, to learn more about our podcasts, classes, and career accelerator programs. Linerun. With that, we're going to get going and get started with our conversation, and we're going to go to Carter first. Carter, so happy to have you here with us to share your insight and to have you involved.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
As someone who actively helps tech ventures grow and develop, what specific challenges over the next 12 to 18 months do you see for you and your team at Penn Innovation and at 1776? And continuing to support these startups at all stages, and how are you adapting your approach to do this?
You know, that's a great question, Brian, and it's very different depending on which lens I'm looking at it through. You know, on the one hand, you know, at the Penn Innovation Center, you know, over 70% of our companies are biotech companies, and very candidly, you would not think that we were in a pandemic if you were to walk into the Penn Innovation Center, go up to the second floor, because there's active engagement happening with the innovators. The teams are moving forward, and you know, they're growing, and there's funding through SBIR, STTR initiatives, and even VC funding for the life science and biotech hasn't dropped off that much in their arena. Now, if I look at that though through the lens of the other high-tech growth companies that are in Penn Innovation, it's slower, and it has been, you know, roughly since the second month of the pandemic. And so one of the things that I'm hearing more and more often is, you know, of course, you know, funding has come to almost a complete halt. But even beyond that, when you really start to dig deep, you're hearing them say things like, you know, in the first month and a half, the team was excited to work in a remote setting. So everyone was working really, really hard because no one wanted to get fired because of COVID. Now that's worn off. It's harder to motivate them. It's extremely difficult to innovate in a virtual setting. And, you know, and very candidly, the relationship with space right now has become very transactional. It's you know, when people are coming into the center, they're coming into it for a very specific use, a very specific need, and then they leave that. And that's not really the best case for ideation. You know, you need that kind of spontaneous, you know, you get the coffee and then all of a sudden you think of something that you don't have on your agenda, and you go to a whiteboard, you can't, it's harder to recreate that in the Zoom setting. So some of the things that we're starting to think about, is really how do you take some of the good things that we've learned over the pandemic, really doing hybrid virtual types of events, expanding those opportunities beyond our network, right? Because you want to bring as many people as you can in, um, because we need to expand the outcomes. COVID has really kind of served as this accelerant for everything that was wrong, right? And so there's people are going to need more access to funding and more access to networks, because I'm seeing that chasm between the developer who has a great delivery service and that delivery person, right? And that chasm, if as long as it continues to broaden, that's a problem. Over 40% of the startups so far who are impacted by COVID were of Black and Brown founders. And so we have to make sure we're expanding our networks for opportunity for people to engage. And that's something you're going to see a lot more from us in the next coming years.
Very happy to hear that. And I think if 2020 has brought us any lesson aside from how to use Zoom, it's that we need to recognize and take account of all of these challenges that people from different backgrounds and other facets of life that we don't necessarily share, but understand where they are coming from and help develop solutions that include them. I think really kudos to you and your team for really taking that on in your community and recognizing that. I think also one part that you mentioned about the investments, it really helps to bridge us over to Ellen and your vantage point at the intersection of entrepreneurship and investment. So from what you're seeing, how has COVID changed the relationship dynamic between startups and investors, particularly in the Philadelphia area? And what can both sides do to help each other moving forward?
Right. Well, a lot of what Carter says applies directly to what, what the investor experience was, during the past year. And I have to tell you, I left my job at Temple to go work at Robinhood full time, never done that before in the pandemic year, and thought, holy crap, what have I done to myself? But it ended up being being good. As investors, we spent the first 6 months, and you'll hear this from just about any investor you talk to. We spent the first 6 months of the year doing two things. One was we focused on our current portfolio companies to make sure that they were okay emotionally, monetarily, that they had the PPP money that they needed, that they understood all that they had a very clear roadmap, not just for 6 months, like, a startup normally would, but for 18 months, something to get us through this time period. And so we spent a lot of time with our portfolio companies, and that was actually really good. That really helped build some more ties with the portfolio company. At the same time, we were feeling the pain of the community of entrepreneurs who were just coming up, especially diverse entrepreneurs. And so what I saw our group do, both Robinhood and MADV, is we started dedicating big chunks of time through the use of Zoom doing office hours. And we didn't care where in the cycle companies were, and actually the earlier the better, to help get them on the right track, to give them feedback early from investors, to help make sure that they had, that they were really, again, thinking through a roadmap, that they had the right information, that they were, if they were thinking they needed investor money, that they were presenting the right package, and it was truly a scalable information, truly a scalable company. So those were the two things we really focused on in the 6 months, and we enjoyed so much the office hours and the greater community involvement that we've maintained that, but we ended up investing as much this year in the last 6 months as we had in the previous year, which surprised us, and probably surprises some of you. But Zoom actually made it much easier for us to meet with entrepreneurs, to get through due diligence, you know, to, and even to educate our members and to do education, not just office hours, but education for entrepreneurs and for our portfolio companies. So, you know, in some ways, I mean, it was a holy crap year, of course, but on the other hand, it ended up being as good a year as it could have been. And I hope that's a positive message for you all, that we did, you know, that we did end up investing just as much as we did before. And we actually added more members to our group. I think the other thing is the types of opportunities that we saw changed. You know, for a while, every pharma company had "and COVID," you know, in their description, and you had to really tease out which ones really had COVID-related solutions from those that didn't. But you know, there were, you know, the e-commerce companies. This was, you know, this is a time for them to really shine and grow. And so that, you know, that's, you know, that's been really interesting. But we are definitely looking for companies that have an 18-month roadmap. We want to make sure we're giving them enough money to hit that roadmap, because it's going to be at least 18 months before, you know, the economy and everything truly recovers.
Agreed with everything that you said, Ellen. And I'm really happy to hear that your groups are taking the initiative to go above that normal 6-month, 12-month runway, and to help the companies get through, you know, this difficult process and on the road to the economic recovery for the country. I think that's really important. And something else that you mentioned, I also wanted to point out. I bounce around into different accelerators across the country, and also in London a lot. And before the pandemic, the number one thing was always from startups that I hear from or work with is getting face time with investors and getting quality face time. So I think it's really, really interesting that, you know, COVID and the Zoom life that we're all living right now has been able to give people that face-to-face and to break down those barriers where you don't need a gatekeeper. It's more, everybody's more accessible. Very, very important. And, you know, going from investments to the general community, Tracy, would love to go to you next. You're a founder, you're a community builder, and for anyone who is around the Philadelphia community, we all know that you're very active. What changes or shifts have you seen within the community, the Philly tech scene, over the past few months compared to the year or two prior to COVID? What has been that growth as a result of the pandemic?
So I think we're pretty much aware of the deals that have been happening within the Philly community. I'm losing track of time. So it was either last week or the beginning of this week, where we saw David Bookspan's company was just purchased. We've certainly seen multiple biotech, biopharmas gone. So it just seems like there is this steady pace of really good news for good companies. And that's always exciting to me. I think, you know, one of the differences that we're seeing, you talk about community building, you know, the ability to have events like this, you know, normally for me, there's a lot of planning. I can only go to so many events. So, you know, trying to see the silver lining of being able to participate in later events, multiple events during a day. So it's a lot of information that you're able to glean. But on the other side, there's no face-to-face networking in an event like this. So, you know, I feel like there's less, you know, bumping into somebody, these serendipitous meetings that, you know, you see somebody new. So, you know, there's more outreach that has to happen. Unlike, you know, Ellen, although I can do office hours, it's individual reach outs, and it's also not my full-time job. So I think that sense of community is maybe a little dissipated, but we do have some really, you know, Philly startup leaders Slack channel and group I think is really important. I'm on 1776 and their group. So I'm sure there's other community groups that are together, but sort of that mixing and melding, I think is something that I certainly look forward to getting back to. But the Zoom life is not, there are good pieces of it. And I think we have to remember that. Just trying to think from the tech girl side, what I've heard from the team, since I'm not in the day-to-day anymore, they took this opportunity to do a pivot, in which they call the pandemic pivot, and they're using Zoom to their advantage. I think they've been able to do almost like 25% more because of the amount that they can, that they're able to spread out to. And people have time and they want to do something good. So that's been, from a community standpoint like that, from a nonprofit standpoint, I think, that's something that is a plus. But in general, I think the networking piece is the tougher part, even though we're seeing some of these wins.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that, Tracy, with the networking part. I've heard from different communities that it's been this real blessing that you're able to access, other communities through the online medium, particularly Silicon Valley, since, it's really hard to get in front of anyone unless you actually fly out there. Versus in the local community, it's a little bit more difficult because we're all used to bumping into each other. So it's a really weird dynamic where it's easier to get into a large community, but then you feel a little bit more isolated in the smaller communities. So I think trying to find that balance is really where we're all going to end up both winning, and then also where we're actually going to take this post-COVID, where we're able to have the in-person events and then also mix all the stuff we learned through whatever this is going to end up being with the time frame with in COVID time. So really great insights there. And, we take it from the community to a more high level. And Emin, I want to bring you in. You've worked all over the place in the community, but in different organizations and also with your alma mater, Drexel, startups across all verticals. What specific trends have you seen in Philly, doubling down on what we've asked earlier from the other panelists? What specific trends have you seen during the pandemic that you feel will shape how Philadelphia as a tech hub will be coming out of COVID?
Yeah, so I think, my instinct is to draw a longer timeline. So I've been paying attention to startups in Philadelphia professionally since 2004. Every year that I've been involved with the startup ecosystem, either in the suburbs or in the city, it's gotten bigger, it's gotten stronger, it's gotten more vibrant. I think that trend largely has continued. For IC at 3401, we had record membership. We added membership in the middle of the pandemic, despite the fact that people weren't coming on site. We had 28 companies raise more than $20 million last year out of the site, which was up on both numbers. So what I see is, for startups, what matters is speed to information. It's finding out what that next hurdle is and how they can get over it, and getting connected to the people that can help them get over hurdles as quickly as possible. And that's really what I focus on regardless of how I'm interacting with the startup ecosystem. It's helping entrepreneurs get what they need as quickly as possible, from people that can help in a productive and contributory way. And so within that, I do think that, a lot of what Tracy is saying resonates a lot with me, right? There's really a barbell of interaction. I think a lot of people have kind of shut down a lot of their interactions with other people. I think it's pretty common to talk to people through COVID, and their response to, have you made any new connections or friends that you would consider, really close or in an inner circle? By and large, I think that answer is no. But you also look at general trends, and, I'll use something that I just saw from Josh Koppelman the other day, which is when they started in in the mid 2000s with first round capital, their diligence process from first intro to making an investment was 90 days. Today, that's 9 from first touch to investment and writing a check. And so because the speed of information, the speed of business, and the barriers, because you now not only don't you fly across the country in a pandemic, but you need to find other ways to adapt to the pandemic environment. Some things are moving much faster, and I think that's true in a lot of different ways. I've seen a lot of companies start slicing down timelines for sales processes significantly, getting into the market faster, getting feedback from customers or potential customers a lot faster. And so that cadence of iteration has speeded significantly. And the ones that have been able to handle that and work with it have been successful faster than I think you would have seen before the pandemic. So I see Philadelphia's ecosystem becoming stronger, becoming more vibrant, but I also think that the general trend is that it's harder to find those entrepreneurs, and it's harder for those entrepreneurs to find us as ecosystem builders outside of whatever their normal parameters are, because there's not a physical space to go to. And so you have to find, the Venture Cafe website, and then you have to go, 3, 4, 5 clicks deep and register and do a whole bunch of other things that I think make it both more accessible and limit the number of things that people are getting involved with and going to and developing relationships at.
I think it's really, really intriguing that you brought up that, companies coming into 3401 has increased during COVID, and that's an effect of people wanting community. And I think that's a really strong indicator, at least to me, that not only is the community flourishing, but also that they really desire to be together in some way, shape, or form. And I think that was one of the concerns we all had going into this from all of our perspectives and all of our different verticals. How were we going to really bring all of the nuances of being offline and in person? How is that going to translate to Zoom and all this other stuff that we do online? So really, really promising to hear all of this. And I think it also brings us to a really great point and a really great question. Ellen, I'm going to go to you first. Obviously, pandemic has changed how startups, different companies, investors are approaching the future of work and the future of being in a physical space. How do you see companies being in Philadelphia? How important will it be moving forward for them to be together in Philadelphia, physically being around each other, where they can do a lot of their work online?
Mm-hmm. So first, I think one of the interesting things we've seen, has been the people in New York wanting to be somewhere where there's a little more space and a little more livability, because what's the point of living in New York if if there's anyone from New York on here, I'm sorry, but this is the conversation I've been hearing. And so we're getting some of them even to come, we've seen some migration of people from New York coming here to Philly. I mean, there's just so much talent here. Compared to other of these big tech locations, the living is it's much easier here. It's more diverse here. It's easier to ride your bike somewhere. It's easier to, go to a BYO and have an affordable, amazing dinner here. And so all these things I think will continue to attract people. I think it is really critical that we continue to grow this ecosystem that has been growing in Philadelphia. I think we're starting to, I used to always talk about density. That was always just an important thing is we need innovation needs a place. And I think that's, that's still true. And I think what Eamon was talking about, with the, and Carter, people are still coming in. And so, and I think the hubs are continuing to grow. The life science hub, the healthcare technology hubs, the e-commerce hubs, and we need to continue to grow that. We need to continue to, there was such a great brain drain for years, and then we conquered the brain drain, right, of people from universities, and now they're not actually coming onto campus as much. So that's going to be, an interesting thing, in terms of who's working in our companies. And I'm not answering the question you asked, Brian. I'm sorry about that. I just, but I mean, I think about location and growing companies. Of course, it's still really important to grow these companies, but how we do it, will be different, at least for the short term. Over the long term, to continue to increase the density of these different businesses functions. I think that's really going to be critical, that density concept, and whether it's in person or, whether it's on location or in groups, we still need to do that. And we still need to, that Philly, Philly showed the world a lot this year, right? This was our year. So a lot of people want to be here. This was really our year, I think.
100%.
Despite all those bad things happening.
Bad things happening.
No, only good things happen here.
Yes. And you brought up a really great point too. For so long, especially in the beginning, where texting was starting to get online, and I remember this coming out of college, Philly was trying to write a narrative. And it was really, really difficult for people to get around to one message about what is it. It took a while for Philly to get the one message. I think we have it finally, and it's really starting to show and attract people because Philly has that identity that people can relate to. And riffing off that a little bit, Carter, we'll also love to get your thoughts on this. How do we kind of grow the pot?
Well, it's here's the good thing. I couldn't agree more with Ellen. Philly, if you were to Google and look at a satellite image of Philly versus New York, you would see why people during a pandemic would travel to Philly immediately. There's green space. It's one of the only cities I know where you could be in the mountains in an hour or at the beach in an hour. The transit is relatively good, no hit on SEPTA there, but just, in comparison to a DC, it's not quite at that level,
well,
but good.
I will chime in quickly, Carter.
Yeah.
Philly Transit's a lot better when you're directly above the train station than when you're at Gray's Ferry, but you can get where you're going.
There's a bus from my house to Gray's Ferry, by the way. So.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you. But it brings up a larger point, because the way we tripled down on digital infrastructure at the onset of the pandemic, we're going to have to make that same kind of an investment in mobility, the capacity for people to get anywhere they want to go in Philly. And those are the things that really are going to end up making the difference. There are people who will not cross the Schuylkill to come into Pitavation because we're in Gray's Ferry. But I see that as our asset because, we have all of this open space. We're able to activate this plaza area for entrepreneurs and wellness for them to get outside of the building. But, for Philly to continue to prosper, that growth is also going to have to be, it's going to have to be it's going to have to be more broad than just the eds and meds that traditionally people associate with Silicon Valley and that terminology. It's happening. So if you were to combine, the huge exits and investments that have happened in 2020, they would not come up to half of what happened in life science with the Arrows and the Charismas of the world, et cetera. It's happening. I'm hoping that we'll all, as Ellen mentioned, e-commerce is bubbling. We'll eventually see a GoPuff effect happen, similar to the way we've seen, with the Charismas and Arrows and Roche of the world. But it's got to be a little bit more even in the growth, because what we don't want to see happen is we don't want to be just a more diverse version of Boston. We want to be better than that, and we can be.
And Brian, I'm just going to stand on my soapbox for a tiny bit and talk about regionalism. We are Philadelphia region. I am sitting in the burbs right now. I work in the burbs. My husband is working at home right now, but likes to work in the city. My kids live in the city. So I think that one of the things that holds us back as a region is we don't think ourselves as a region. We think when people say Philadelphia, it's the city. I would like us to start thinking 5-county area, and maybe across the river too if we want to really expand. But we have to act like that.
Well, and it can get even more granular, right, Tracy? I mean, Philly is a city of neighborhoods, right? I was so horrified when Mayor Kenny came in and everything was, no, it has to be neighborhood by neighborhood. Like for some things, yes, but let's not get more granular about these things, right?
And when we start, when Carter talks about mobility, it's mobility from King of Prussia into the city. It is mobility from where I live in the Cheltenham area into the city, which is pretty fabulous. But it's not so fabulous when you get into Bucks County and Chester County. So I agree that mobility should be for the region, because the connections, there's a large life sciences complex that is going to be built by Brian O'Neill in King of Prussia.
Yeah.
Do we want that separated? Amino Payments was not in Philadelphia. It was, I think he was in Conchi or Radnor. But we still call it Philadelphia. So let's be aware of that. Let's not let, county lines really block our growth, especially now that we have the ability to be remote. So, as a region, it is livable. You do have the choice of having urban and very close. If you want to be outside of the urban area, very, decent way to get in. We certainly do not have the traffic of lots of other cities and regions. We're not perfect, but it's, any of us that have traveled outside the area understand that. There's a multitude of different types of businesses. So if you move here and you're part of the startup community and you have a spouse that works has another type of job, I mean, we have to think about that as well. It is not just about the people who are part of our community, but also their spouses and partners, and how are we helping them get acclimated? One of the things that I remember hearing back early on was that people did not want to move here, like that next level person who was going to take that company, because they didn't see where they could go next or what their spouse could do. So these are things that we have to think about in the fullness of when we're pitching.
I think it's really, really interesting you bring that up, because with Philadelphia, it tends to be very, in the Philly metro area, it tends to be very selective on when we count everybody in. And it's usually sports teams, and that's generally it, versus business and schools and transportation. And thinking of Philadelphia as the metro area, I think, requires a psychological shift for everybody, where it starts there. You have to count everybody in, and then if you count everybody in, how do you really connect the nodes in the way that it makes sense? So, I think that's a much higher level conversation, but it's good to implant that seed now.
And we also have to understand that when a business moves from Chester County into Philadelphia, that is not a win for the region. That's just somebody moved within our region. Let's talk about businesses that were growing, businesses that we're winning either satellites or bring in businesses, and not, okay, this business moved into Center City. I think that's going to change as well, post-pandemic.
Yeah, it's got to be growing the pie, right? And it's got to be growing the
Correct.
pie of opportunity for the region, not fighting over whether somebody's, on Ballackinwood on the other side of City Line Avenue or not, right? Which is
Correct.
sometimes the granularity that we get into.
And if we want to talk about diversity, mobility has been something that has kept, I think, certain parts of populations from being able to easily get to where some of the higher jobs are, which are out of the city, that are in King of Prussia, that are on the mainline area. And we have to think about that as well.
Definitely.
I mean, that's just to jump in for a second. I mean, that's echoed everywhere when you look at the startup ecosystem as well, right? If you look at the maps for what's considered Philadelphia's venture invested area, when you're looking at those types of maps, like it's Philadelphia County and like maybe a couple of counties in South Jersey. Everything else in New Jersey is part of New York and they're getting credit for that. Everything Harrisburg West is like, Columbus, Ohio or Cleveland or something like that's getting credit for it. Everything south of Philadelphia is going into DC metro area. And we have to do a better job of staking our claim and speaking as a region. And that's something that I see a lot, particularly with the Science Center, right? I mean, our own shareholders are from Lehigh through New Jersey, all the way down to University of Delaware, west to Penn State. And, we love to carve that area out as our own, but all of these reports and other things are constantly fighting against us and, not helping us show the size and the volume and the vibrancy that we really are.
So we need to start talking about it. The only way to fix it is for us to start talking about it and to bring people to the table that are in the other counties. Not everybody wants to play, but let's drag them in and let's make sure that that Philadelphia doesn't feel like they're by themselves.
No, I wouldn't disagree that this is a huge problem that needs to be fixed. But I'll also tell you, I grew up in Virginia, and Maryland and Virginia, nobody ever crosses the Potomac, right?
Nope.
You've got Oakland and San Francisco with a really good transportation system in between them, and people don't cross in between, or at least, the last time I was out there, they weren't crossing in between. New York, New Jersey, I mean, that's a source of so many jokes. So we're not alone in this. We should probably look and see what other communities are doing, because I'm sure they're working on bridging it. It's not a unique problem, but we are such a neighborhoody kind of place that it does feel painful, but we're not the only ones with this issue, but
No,
it hurts us. I think it really hurts us.
I will bring up something that I learned from one of our other discussions, since I do this a lot with all the different communities. LA had this same problem 2 years ago. And, it was Silicon Valley, it was downtown LA, it was Hollywood, and then everywhere else. And now they got it to the point that they talk about it for the most part as one community. And the way they were able to do that is started with the government. And again, a lot of red tape there. But what they were able to do with the government was bring in the money, the investment arm, and then bring in industry, bring them together to talk about, okay, how do we support each other? And then create an entity that basically acts as the distributor of, if you need this, here's who you go to. So that is a model that has worked for them, and it's worked for them for about a year now. So that is probably the best example I can give you from what I've learned in doing this discussion in 12 different communities.
I mean, PACT does a pretty good job of trying to stake claims around the region as well, and what the region is, and getting broader adoption for those things would be great. But when you look at particularly the startup community, right? Mark Schuster doesn't identify himself as like a Hollywood investor. He's a national investor, and I think we need to raise our eye level and raise our game and start looking at how we do things that are nationally competitive, globally competitive, not what's the best calendar app in North Philly, right? You gotta be competing on a much larger basis and acting accordingly. And I think that's something too often that we look down, or we look around at what we can immediately see rather than thinking on a larger scale. And I think that's a changeable, modifiable thing. I think that's something that we can, Tracy, to your point, talk about and and work through and start elevating all of our games. And I know certainly with the startups that I work with at IC at 3401 and through the other programs that I'm working with, that yes, they should know Ellen and Robinhood Ventures if they're looking to raise capital, but they also, particularly in this time where you don't have to fly across the country, they should be reaching out to, investors in LA or Silicon Valley or New York or wherever else, right? And try and find the right fit, two-way fit for them. And if that's Robinhood, that's fantastic. I am fully supportive of that. I would love to see many more local returns going to Robinhood and Robinhood investors. And if it's not, because for whatever reason, that's perfectly okay too. That's not an indictment on what you're doing. It just means that it's not the right fit right now.
No, I was going to say, I was just going to say exactly that this is an opportunity for people to branch out to other investors because it's so easy to take meetings. But in order to get investors to take, so the other question is, how do we get investors to really find out about Philly? And that gets back to the messaging. And someone said we have our message clear now. I don't think we do. I don't think we do at all. I think that's a fundamental flaw is, what is our message? Who are we? And as Carter said, it's got to be more than eds and meds. So what is that fundamental message? And how do we bring more investors, who are elsewhere to find all the gems that are in Philly?
Right.
And once they find, I've noticed that there are certain investors that once they find Philly and, in their perspectives coming from other regions, we're underpriced. Our companies are underpriced. Once they find a company in Philly, they come back for more, and that's a good thing. So how do we get more investors from outside into Philly? I think that's going to be critical, and I think we need good messaging to do it. Off my soapbox.
No, it's a good soapbox, though. It's a great soapbox, Ellen. And I think some of it's going to happen as a result, and when we're in the post-COVID reality, some of it's going to be organic, because we're going to see this shift of people coming into the Philadelphia region. I'm not going to say city of Philly, Tracy, the region, and people leaving. A lot of it's going to be organic. As people have come to appreciate moving into homes and leaving the city for a variety of reasons, for kids, etc., the schools, what have you. And then people are coming in because they left New York and they love the price of the apartments and the housing here. I'm hoping that we'll see some of that happen on its own, but for it to really work, the people who have power in small circles will have to be comfortable with not seeing them as individual circles, but as part of a larger node. And that, Ellen, I think the only place that came close between Maryland and Virginia doing it would be Northern Virginia and DC when they were going after Amazon HQ2. Right. They did it as one package. Not that anyone wanted that nightmare anyway, but at the end of the day, that's the reason why they got it, was because they did not submit individually. They submitted as the DMV, Washington, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, to win that Jeff Bezos grift.
Definitely. And going off of that tangent, Carter, I'm going to skip over to our other question. And I think we'll start with Emin first. Philly is very rich in not just the startups, but also the resources. If we expand the pool, so we have the universities, we have investors who are a bunch of different places. What do we need them to do? Like the different resources, and like the Science Center or 1776 or Penn, what do we need them to do over the next 12 to 18 months to try to fortify and to raise a profile of the Philly tech community and to grow it?
Yeah, so I think a heck of a lot more cooperation, right? And focus on growing the pie. And I think a coherent external message that allows those investors, those boosters, those corporations to more easily navigate Philadelphia, right? And so, I used to hear this all the time working at a predecessor nonprofit incubator, which was, I'd like to go to Philly, but I can go to, New York, or I can go to a different city, and I can go to one spot I can see all of the companies that interest me basically under one roof. I can spend a morning there. I can go out, get a nice lunch, and then I can leave town and go do something else, right? In Philadelphia, if you have to travel around to 7 different spots to see all the people that are interesting to you, because we make it difficult to navigate, because we don't have the corporate support, because we don't have the support from the city and the state, because we don't have a unified voice around those things, you cannot easily say, come into Philadelphia and we'll make it easy for you to find the things that you're specifically interested in, right? And so I totally agree and would echo Ellen's comment earlier about having density, right? It requires that density and that critical mass. But again, it's critical mass around specific speed to information, and it's critical mass and density around specific things that are interesting to other people and making it clear to them how they navigate. So, what are we doing? We're starting to reach out for coffee and capital for Quorum to not just Philly investors, but to regional investors, and bring them in and saying, hey, you may only be able to spend a morning with us virtually, but we'll make it easier for you to look at 5, 10 companies by reaching out to maybe folks we know at Pennovation, maybe folks we know at Ben Franklin, maybe folks that we know at CIC or WeWork, that will allow you to find the right companies, whether they're under our roof or not, that are going to interest you and give you a reason to come back to Philadelphia and start paying attention. And I'll tell you, companies in this way are getting ahead of the curve. I feel like every month I open the New York Times or the Inquirer, and I find some new story about a company relocating from Boston, from New York, from other places to Philadelphia. Why? The cost of living, the access to talent. And again, those things aren't necessarily as public. Philly doesn't do a great job of advertising and hanging out a neon sign with an arrow that says, find that 9-figure tech exit here, but that's not to say that they aren't happening. It just means that they're not overt about finding press about it and making sure that they're covered in Forbes or, wherever else, right? The only reason we know that GoPuff is a unicorn is because of some leak, not because GoPuff stuck out a flag and said, we're now a unicorn. It was leaked 6 months after the fact, right? And wound up in the press that way. So Philly's very heads down, but I think there's got to be a better balance of being heads down and working on what you're doing and that kind of Quaker ethic and ethos, and helping people find what it is that they're looking for, and rolling out the red carpet now and again to make it easier for people to find what they're looking for in Philadelphia. It is a top 10 market. Whatever you are looking for is absolutely here. But we need to make it easier to find those things.
So I think, Eamon, you should be doing the marketing. That was awesome. I'm glad this is recorded.
Yes. And to Emin's point, that's actually what Austin did 7-8 years ago. And the hub is the Capital Factory. And I think, we have a lot of mini Capital Factories all around Philadelphia, but we don't have the one where it's like you said, Emin, where people fly and it's like, you're going to go to the one event at the Capital Factory and you're going to meet everybody, or to the bigger CIC up in Cambridge, and the bigger Venture Cafe up in Cambridge, where you have everyone goes in on a Thursday and everyone kind of sees each other, which is what the mini ones are replicating, but on a smaller scale. But the thing is, the one in Cambridge is globally known. So we had a question in the chat, and I think this really doubles down with our conversation here. Pete Fleming, he said, whose job is it to create this messaging? So
we all voted for Eamon.
That's right, exactly. So we saw the problem. I've been down this path 4 different times. It's normally what happens is, I think PAC did it once.
Yeah.
Greater Philadelphia. There's one that's going on right now for Global Philadelphia. I haven't seen anything come out of it. It's usually, I don't want to be negative, but it usually doesn't sound true. I just don't know what it is. I never feel like it really captures who we are. I mean, the Visitor Bureau Center did many fabulous campaigns, but that was about coming to visit versus capturing the
Why to
spirit,
stay?
the spirit of who we are. And honestly, I think one of the greatest messaging is done by the flyers through Gritty, because I think that's exactly who we are.
Yep. It has to be
well,
in your face to be us, stuff
Yeah.
like Silicon Philly and
Ugh.
crappy stuff like that.
Oh, that drives me.
For- you know,
I hear that.
I will say I prefer eyelids on my Philly, but that's just me.
So, I'm not sure who owns it. And I think that, again, if we go back to regionalism versus just saying, oh, it's someone in the Philadelphia city government, there's something missing in that connection. But, I think we need to hire somebody who is responsible for the region to talk about what we bring. And I can talk to you from the developer standpoint that there are people here in our region who still don't understand that we have a pretty amazing tech community here. It's very deep. And I still hear after 18, 20 years that there's no developers here. So
yeah, it's too bad Comcast doesn't have any developers, and Monetate didn't have any developers, and Curelate didn't have any developers, and Urban Outfitters e-commerce platform doesn't have any developers,
and GoPuff doesn't have any developers, and any of the bio.
HP didn't hire 1,200 people here remotely, and Microsoft didn't have 600 people here remotely. And
right. So
just too bad.
We're to your point earlier is our inability, when we have big exits, when we have things that are going on, to really, really trumpet what's happening, and to feel proud of what we do, and not silo ourselves. I think that's another issue, is that we silo ourselves as a community.
Definitely something that we really need to overcome, not just as ourselves, but also Tracy, as you mentioned, as a community. We have about 5 minutes left. Going through the questions that have been asked so far in the chat, and they've been wonderful. I think, Tracy, going back to what you were saying about the community and events, we had a question from John Mercer earlier about the medium of the Philadelphia startup community, or PSL. Where does the organization go from your perspective? What does it need to do in order to serve the community better?
Well, I think right now they need to find an executive director, so that they have somebody guiding the ship right now, because they don't. I think that since the start and when they decided to actually have paid staff, I think that changed things for the better. I mean, they're doing. It's not just about events, which is how we started, and community gathering, but really doing early stage incubation, so that ideas can sort themselves out before they feel they need to go over to Carter or to Ellen, or over to any of the other spots here. PSL is a force. I mean, I think it's a community building force. So I'm curious to see what happens in that next phase. It's a really important, in my opinion, maybe it's not the capital factory, but it is a place, a virtual gathering place. So I'm excited to see who's, what's up next for them, who's up next. And certainly look, Kira, before she left, was able to raise, the $500,000 for the fund, to help Black and Brown entrepreneurs. That just shows the power of what the Philly startup leader community can do when you have a strong leader there.
That's really great, and definitely props to Kiara for all the work that she did for her tenure at PSL.
Most definitely.
Mm-hmm.
We have 3 minutes left, and I think it'd be great to hear from each of you really quickly. One thought you have, or one hope you have in 2021 for the Philly community moving forward. What you hope to see. Tracy, we'll start with you.
Oh, just one. I'll try and keep it short. So I think that what I would like us as a community is to own who we are, embrace it, and go and be loud and proud about it. We did not have a problem in front of the convention center. We took something that could have been an outright tragedy and turned it into this beautiful party that, if you had anyone who was communicating with you during that time that was outside of the area, the thank yous that were coming in, the sense of pride and the go feel like this is who we are. Let's embrace it. Let's talk about it. Let's get it out there.
Great. Carter, one thought from you.
This right here is the one season where, if we're serious, we can really tackle the poverty rate in Philly. This is the time with the new administration, with the momentum of what's happening, because until we do that, we will be seen, and I'm not from Philly, but for people who are not from Philly will see us similar to Detroit, and we don't want that.
Agreed. Ellen?
Just running out of wisdom.
You're
I
done.
hope, I saw people caring for each other. So this is not necessarily just the tech community, but I saw people caring for each other. I was really in my little neighborhood, and beyond. I was just really impressed how people were caring for each other this year, and I hope that spirit continues.
Agreed. And Evan?
Yeah, I'm going to link three things together in one sentence. One, we need to make Philly more navigable in a way that grows the pie of opportunity for everybody so that we can, three, unlock the potential of Philadelphia, which is more than any other large city in America. And when I think about the poverty rate in Philadelphia, I think of that entirely as untapped potential. Talent occurs uniformly, and we're missing out on 35% of our potential with the way that things are now. So let's get moving. I'm with you, Carl.
Definitely gotta get moving. And with that, we did finish on time, so we kept our commitment to Venture Cafe. So to our entire panel, Carter, Evan, Ellen, Tracy, thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts with us. It's been a really wonderful hour. Thank you everybody for participating. The Science Center will be releasing this in about a week on their YouTube channel. And also, if you're interested in looking at any of our other previous conversations, New York, Boston, LA, Austin, London, Berlin, a bunch of other different places, linerun.co. And the Linerun YouTube channel it's all there. So hope to have this conversation again with you, and also to meet everyone up in person and have that beer and have that drink once everything gets better.
Thank you, Brian. Great job. Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks. Great to see
Brian.
you.
Definitely. Have a good night, everybody.